What is acting?
Thanks for that question. Because a lot of people think that acting is lying. And that's, one of the things that I think is the most important thing about it is that it's my teacher, my teacher, my special teacher, Jean Shelton, who just passed away recently, used to say that people think that acting is lying, but really acting is being more truthful than you get to be in real life. And that was always the joy of it for me. I always felt like a little bit of a fraud in real life. And I always felt like characters were saying and doing things that I didn't dare to do, that they were a deeper part of me. So that's what I love about acting, is that it's more truthful than real life. It's not lying at all. And a very common definition is acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. That's a definition that a lot of people use. I did want to mention that when I was learning acting, when I was in acting class back in the 1970s, our god, if you will, was Marlon Brando. And in those days, you didn't have access to all kinds of ways of finding out about actors. They didn't talk about things and they weren't interviewed. And Brando was, of course, notoriously reserved. But he was going to be on a Dick Cavett, a big interview show. So everybody in our class, we all stayed home. No way to record things in those days. We all stayed home to watch Brando be interviewed on the Dick Cavett show. And he said, well, acting, everybody is nothing. It's just everybody acts all the time because people never tell you what they really think. So everybody is acting all the time. And we were so disappointed to hear him say that because we felt so, involved in our craft and so deeply connected to the truthfulness and of acting and finding the truth of the character, the truth of the play or film. And but what I come to think is that what he was saying, what he really meant, is that whatever people say, there is subtext to it. Okay? And that I do think is exactly right. That in real life, as well as for characters in a movie or television show or play, there's always subtext to what people are saying. So in real life, people will ask you how you are, and you will say, I'm fine. And that will be very often a lie, right? But if you let yourself believe that there's always subtext. So for example, if you ask me, how are you? And I might say, well, I'm shitty, but this is my subtext, right? This is what I'm not saying. I feel really shitty, but I'm going to give you a break and not tell you all about it. And instead, I'm going to say I'm fine. Okay? So even when that seems like a lie, somebody says, how are you? And I say, I'm fine. It seems like a lie, but really there's always subtext. And that's true for acting. There's always subtext. So in that sense, I've come around to understanding that Brando's definition of acting is also completely valid.
Why do you say that acting is more honest than real life?
Because real life is so bound by the social parameters, by what's socially acceptable, and characters go way outside of what's socially acceptable. They go into places of deep pain. They go into places of transgression. They go into places of joy and exuberance that isn't really socially acceptable. And in fact, let me put this another way. A lot of feeling is not socially acceptable. When people, in real life, we don't want anybody to know how we feel most of the time. If somebody makes us angry, we don't want to show it. And we even say to each other, don't let that person get to you. Don't let him know that he bothers you, right? And that's a real watchword for getting along in the social world, is to not let people know when they've upset you, to not let them know if they've hurt your feelings, to not let them know if they've made you angry, to not, and very often, to not let them know if they've turned you on, if they've, made you feel excited in their presence. So, and actors get to do that. They get to express things that are very human things that that in real life are frowned upon. The social parameters are very strict, often.
So the notion that acting is lying, where do you think that came from?
From people who don't know anything about acting. Well, I think if you don't know anything about what acting is about is really about the subtext, then it's easy to think that. It's not that people are stupid for thinking that, because an actor is pretending to be in love with somebody when they're married to somebody else, or they're pretending to murder somebody when they claim that they're an upstanding citizen. So I can see where it comes from, that it has to do with that people would think that. But it's unfortunate. It has to do with not understanding this idea of subtext, that an actor can be completely truthful with their own subtext. And an actor never needs to let go of their own values, or their own values, or their own ethics. An actor never needs to let go of those. And I don't know, I like to keep telling people about that an actor can be capable of approaching every character without judgment. It's very important for an actor not to judge their character, to be on their character's side, to look for the ways that the character is doing what they think is best, is doing the best they can. But and to understand that as a craft, and it doesn't mean that you have to let go of your own ethics.
Sure. But you could say that we all have certain parts of every character in us, whether we act on them or not. Yeah.
Exactly. We all have impulses. We all have every impulse. Every single person has every single impulse in them somewhere. Now, for some people, they're buried so far down that they wouldn't recognize it in themselves. For actors, they allow those things to be buried less far down, so that they can access them. But it doesn't mean that they change their beliefs about what's right and wrong.
Why is acting an exercise in empathy?
It has a lot to do with the judgment issue, with feeling that that every character is doing what they think is right, what they think is best. They have a reason. Everybody has a reason for everything that they do. I once read a short story, and unfortunately I don't remember the author, but it was a wonderful short story. And it had this line, "There's a reason for everything, and sometimes two." And I've just always clasped that to my heart as something very essential about acting, about script analysis, about directors understanding actors and understanding characters. Everybody has a reason for what they're doing. It might be a reason that the rest of us would look at from the outside and say, that's a crappy reason, that's a stupid reason, that's a wrong reason. Of course, we all have the audience has the right to judge. But the actor has to come from a place of, that the character is operating out of a need. They need something, and they're doing what they can to get there. So it's deeply empathetic, and I actually believe that acting is a kind of spiritual practice. I'm one of those. I'm one of those people that feels that way about it. For myself, when I got into acting, I had no notion of making a career at it. I had no notion. I certainly had no notion of being a movie star or anything like that. It was the 1970s, and I was looking for something to do that would be fulfilling, that would make me understand the world better and understand myself better. Acting was perfect. partly because of my wonderful teacher, who just seemed to know so much about life and about why people do things, why characters do the things they do, and also why people do the things they do. So it was always very personal for me. It was always a learning, a learning experience, learning about myself, learning about the world, learning why people do the things they do, and so that's certainly an exercise in empathy. I think I always try to ask directors to expect that that's what actors are there for, that they're students of life, that they want to know more about people and about the world, and that if directors approach them that way as artists and as ethical people, that they will be able to communicate better and be able to communicate their vision better.
Would you see actors that had different levels of empathy, maybe empathy toward their scene partner, but less so with themselves, and that became a problem in their performances?
Can you give me an example?
Well, you know how some people are incredibly harsh on themselves, whether it's, you know, something that's been said to them in the past that they carry with them. So then they always carry that everywhere they go. And maybe they would take that in a scene and they might treat their scene partner well, but then for themselves, the empathy wasn't there.
Actors are notoriously hard on themselves, always. 90%. There's, you know, to the extent that when you hear a story of an actor who's not hard on themselves, and I'm going to give you one in a second, it's really exciting and amazing and blows other actors' minds. There's a story about Meryl Streep that I read in an article. It was an interview with Chris Cooper, who played opposite her in Adaptation. And he said that every time that a take got blown or didn't work, or she made a mistake or something went wrong, she would, after that, just go, okay, let's go it again. And she never lost her joy of acting. She never came down on herself. She never, many actors after that, something happens, they'll go, oh, and she never did that. And he was shocked. He'd never seen it. So I would say, 90% or 99% maybe of actors are very hard on themselves. And then those sparkling 1% or 10% are unusual. But of course, they have so much freedom. And of course, you want actors to have that kind of freedom. And I've taught actors for a long time, acting classes, and I always wanted them to have that freedom to forgive themselves, and that's why I say to directors, permission to fail is the most valuable thing that you can give an actor. Is you can tell them, don't worry, we'll do it again. If I won't use anything that doesn't work. So we have all the time in the world. And even telling an actor, we have all the time in the world, even if you don't, you'll actually get the shot faster than if you say to an actor, okay, we've only got time for one more shot, so we've got to get it on this shot. It's actually less likely to go well than if you say, we've got all the time in the world. Let's just do one more. And you're more likely to get something good out of that permission to fail, that it's okay if you fail.
Would you see empathy, the degrees of empathy maybe blossom more? Let's say there's a scale, and when a student would come to you in the past for the classes, the workshops, that their empathy, they were closed off, and you could see it in them, whether it was family conditioning. And then over time, the scale, they came more to this side where they just were open to themselves, open to other people.
Well, it was always my hope, of course. It's always my hope. I try not to make myself responsible for whether that happens or not, but it's always my hope that people will, that whether they're acting or whether they're directing, that or whether they're writing, that it will open them up, that it will connect them more to what they feel is important about life. And I used to feel this way when I was an actor myself. When I was in plays a lot all during the 70s, and I used to approach every role with the idea that once the show closed, I would know more about myself than I did at the start of rehearsal. And I think that helped, because that's something that really can happen. If you say, well, I'm going to take this role because I can be really great in it, and I'm going to do it better than anybody else. Well, that's something that you really have no control over, whether that's going to happen or not. But you have more control over whether it's going to happen, that you're going to learn something. So I always think of that as a good place to come from for anybody in the arts, that if your goal on any project is to learn something, then you really can't go wrong. You will reach your goal. If your goal is to learn something, you will reach that goal. If your goal is to be perfect, to be great, to blow everybody out of the water, well, there's a lot of room for disappointment.
What are the biggest misconceptions people have about actors? That they're too sensitive, that their antenna is always up, that they're constantly watching themselves in the mirror, almost as a character walking into a scene?
Well, I think for directors, the directors that I meet, and I taught workshops for directors for many years, and now I do some consulting with directors preparing to make a project. And I think the biggest misconception is that they're fragile somehow, that you can't dare talk to them because they'll start crying or go into a rage or get upset if you say anything about their work. And I suppose where this comes from is that actors do tend to be more expressive than actors sort of tend to call them civilians. People who are not actors tend to be, in the world of actors, civilians. So actors are more expressive, and they might cry if you tell them that the last take they were overacting a bit, but they get over it. They're comfortable with feelings. And the way I see it, the misconception on the part of people who are not actors, that actors are, too excitable, too agitated too quickly, is that in real life we're not allowed to do that. I think anybody would do that if they could, and we're conditioned out of it. Children respond, whatever they feel, they express. Right? They're hurt, they cry. They're angry, they scream. And then little by little, we condition them so they'll be in society. We say, use your words. And when we tell, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but when we tell children, use your words instead of acting out your feelings, we're asking them to intellectualize their feelings. And that's the process of society, is intellectualizing our feelings so that people can get along and everybody can, get to work every day and not scream at each other when although of course that's happening more, isn't it? That people screaming at each other. It's so strange. But reverting to that kind of childish behavior. But so it's good if people don't revert to the childish behavior in the form of road rage. But for actors, it's part of a craft. It's, being available to their feelings, being able to cry or stomp their feet is part of their craft. And I think sometimes directors take it personally. They think, oh, they hate me, they're fragile. But actors aren't that fragile. They really like to be told. We were talking earlier about, if you have lipstick on your teeth or something, they really want to know that. It shouldn't be awkward at all to tell an actor that there's lipstick on their teeth, that because they don't want to be photographed with lipstick on their teeth. So they're grateful if someone tells them. And also if they're overacting. I mean, it might be upsetting for them to hear that, but in the end, they would rather hear that than be cut out of the movie, which you might have to do in the editing room if the performance isn't good enough.
And so let's suppose, I love that analogy of the lipstick on the teeth. I'm doing a scene and you've noticed that I have lipstick on my teeth. You're pulling me aside privately to tell me this? What's the best way to say, Karen, could I talk to you for a moment?
Well, actually, the makeup person should take care of this.
Okay.
The makeup person should take care of this, but should be watching for this and should be running up and taking care of it. But everything should be private. Everything should be private. If the makeup person hasn't stepped forward and you have to say to the makeup person, will you go and take care of, there's makeup on her teeth, would you take care of that? Then there's no need to announce it to the crew.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And when directors have something to give direction or to say something about the take that just happened or what they want to try in the next one, that should always be private. Always be private. The director should come up and take the actor away a little bit and privately, or whisper. Whispering is useful. It's never helpful to give a direction that the rest of the crew can hear. And the reason for that is that then the crew is watching to see if the actor takes that direction. And the actor knows that they're being watched, not just by the director, who hopefully they trust and want to please, but by a whole bunch of people who may not know so much about acting. They're being watched by a whole bunch of people and maybe even gossiped about. So it's very, very, very helpful for an actor's safety to speak to, for the director to speak to the actors privately, always, away from the producers, away from the crew, and it creates a safety for the director as well, because I like to encourage directors to be vulnerable around actors and to be able to say to them, look, something's off here and I don't know what it is. Do you have some ideas about what we might do here? And you don't want to say that in front of the crew. You want that to be a private conversation between you and the actor. But I do think it's very, very helpful for directors to be able to tell an actor when they're not sure what's wrong. Just, instead of jumping into fix-it mode, a lot of directors feel like, oh, something's wrong, I have to fix it. But I want to encourage a collaboration between directors and actors, where where you draw, you pick their brains, you bring them into the process, you use their ideas and their skills to help you solve problems, that you solve problems together if there are problems.
You'd said earlier about actors calling quote unquote normies or whatever civilians.
Civilians.
Right.
So not
normies. So, okay. So civilians, it almost brings me back to, let's say in the workplace, if you've ever worked in an office, like a 9-to-5 job, and the quiet and you hear the typing and the picking up, hello, and it's so subdued. But then if you've ever worked in a restaurant or the service industry, it's wild and crazy and people are yelling. And that's acceptable in that world to a degree, as long as people are somewhat professional. But it almost sounds like that's the analogy of what we see as performers, is sort of this bar environment versus the subdued library office where no one raises their voice. Everyone speaks in a very calm tone. But is that really true? Are actors really that... They can go there too. They can be,
Well, some actors are all different. Actors are all different. And some actors really like to be alone in between takes and not be sociable. And other actors like to horse around and jabber with their fellow actors. They're all different. They're all different. I mean, as far as the atmosphere on the set, the director is responsible for that. You know, for creating an atmosphere so the atmosphere might be full of excitement and kind of a feeling that we're all on edge and anything can go great or go wrong at any time. And that could be a very creative atmosphere, or it can be very workmanlike, and that can be a very creative atmosphere. So, the directors set the tone.
Ah, okay.
Unless they've let that duty slip away from them to, to someone else, like a producer or an actor. You know, a lead actor sometimes will take over. If there's a vacuum. If the director has not set a tone of what they want to, how they want things to go on a set, then there's a vacuum. Someone will probably come in and it might not go the way you want it to.
And that tone doesn't have to be verbally set. It could be set in, action, how they work with other people.
Well, it's part of why directing is a really hard job, really complex and hard job. You've got to be very, very prepared. You've got to have talked to everybody ahead of time, all of the crew chiefs, so that you're, they so call it on the same page. And so that people, so it's actions and words and it's, your own demeanor It's like any supervisor, I think. It's, the leadership skills, that you need for any job that's in a leadership position.
What is result direction?
Result direction is directing the actor by telling them what effect you want them to have on the audience. I started out. Here's my book.
Oh, yes. and this is a 25th edition?
Place? Yeah. This is the 25th anniversary edition of my original book, Directing Actors, which came out in 1996. And the first chapter, I started out, I called it Result Direction and Quick Fixes. And I started out with a list of, at the time, 10 things that I called result direction that were ineffective ways to give direction to actors. And I did it on purpose. I did it to get people's attention. It backfired a little bit because people would come to my workshops afterwards and they'd be terrified that they're going to say the wrong thing. It's one of the reasons why I was so thrilled to get the chance to do this book and to kind of correct that impression that when I talk about result direction, it's a quick way to bring up the subject of subtext. Because what I called the quick fixes, which are the verbs, the facts, or emotional history, imagery, and physical life and event, they're not always that quick. They're quick when you know how to use them. But I wanted to have that first chapter be a way that people would not lose hope. I wanted them to say, okay, these are the list of don'ts, but there's, hope. There are things you can do instead. And but it did turn out, people would come into my workshops and I say, I read that list of things not to do and I do every one of them. And so I'm terrified of saying the wrong thing. Now, I never wanted people to be terrified. I never wanted people to think of result direction as the language police. I always wanted it to be a way to introduce the idea that there's more to story and more to characters than just what you see on a flat screen. That there's an underneath that people's emotional history affects what they do now. That the images in their memory and in their dreams that affects what they do now. That their intention, their verb, or their intention, or their need, or their objective, that's where their behavior comes from. And I wanted directors to know more about that, to understand it, and not because they always have to fix, tell the actor, well, don't play that objective, play this one instead. I never meant that that's what I wanted them to do, but I wanted them to understand the tool of objective, of what the character wants, what the character needs, because it's such a helpful way to talk to actors, to ask them first, what is your objective? What do you want here? And so, and also that these tools about subtext will lead you toward an understanding of emotional event, which is the most important thing for a director to know, is what is the emotional event of a scene? What is the scene about? The simplest example of result direction is a line reading. So if a director says to an actor, let's say the line is, don't lie to me. If director says, you're saying the line wrong, don't say, don't lie to me. Say, don't lie to me. That's a line reading, and that's the simplest example of result direction. And I think by now, most directors know they're not supposed to use that, but it often gets hard for them to understand why. And if they don't understand why, it's not a good idea to give line readings or to tell them, I want you to be angrier, or I want you to be sadder. That's another way to give result direction, to say, you need to be angrier. And if they don't understand the why of it, it's easy for them to feel like, oh gosh, I'm going to say something wrong and I'd better not say anything. And directors in my workshops, they used to come up to me and say, well, is it okay if I say this? And I'd say, well, it's not the language police. You can say anything you want. But ask them what they understand by it. That's a helpful way to do it. And ask them what they're working on. Create a dialogue with them. So, but let me give you an example of how result direction versus understanding what the emotional event of a scene is. So the scene might be an argument, and if the director says to the actors, this is an argument between best friends that could result in the end of the friendship. That creates the emotional stakes, and it's a very specific direction of where this director wants the scene to go. And to say something like that instead of, I want you to be angrier. Okay? So that's the real reason for studying result direction and the alternatives to it, is so that you can get to an understanding of the emotional event, which is which I think the director is responsible for and should communicate to the actors. Although, side note, you should always be ready to change your mind. Sometimes a different emotional event works great or works better, and then you can still move on, even if it's not the one you thought was going to work. But that's kind of the difference between result directing. I want you to get angrier here, I want you to be more disappointed there, versus talking about the emotional events of the story, and to think about the differences in different kinds of arguments. So if you say, this is, instead of saying, this is an argument between best friends that could result in the end of the friendship, a different kind of emotional event, a different kind of argument could be, these people argue all the time. They have had the same argument many times. They're arguing this time. There's something new about this argument. I want us to find out what it is. But I'm thinking it was unlikely to lead to the end of the friendship. Now, I also use the terms of saying it's unlikely to, or it could, instead of it will lead to the end of the friendship, or won't lead to the end of the friendship, so that whatever does happen, whatever emotional event does happen, happens in the moment while the camera is running, so that it's not all, expected. It's not all pat and sort of paint by the numbers.
So if I were in a scene and I'm an actor and I'm delivering a line very flat and it's "don't lie to me." So you're the director, you're saying with result direction and using that, it would be to correct me on my tone maybe, but if you came at it from another angle, you would be explaining why I'm saying this line, and through that I would know how to put more emotion to it.
Well, it might be, or a real quick verb. I might say, what's your intention on this line?
Okay, so then I'm saying, well, this is a friendship and she doesn't understand me and I've told her repeatedly, don't lie to me.
I would say, let that come into the line. Because that sounds very good to me. What you just said sounds like a very good way to play it. So I'd say, let that come into the line. I think that would give it more spark.
Oh, I see.
So the way you said it first, right?
So I'm developing it. Sorry.
Yeah. But let me talk about action verbs a little bit, active verbs, because if you, I did think of an example to do this. If the line is "don't lie to me," I thought of 3 different intentions that we could have. It could be, I'm going to pick to convince, to accuse, and to beg. Very different from each other, right? So just to give you an example of how that would be, I'll do a little improvisation of convincing you of something. And the subtext underneath convincing is telling somebody what you think they should do. So I'm going to say, I think you should never lie. I don't think you or anybody else should ever lie. Don't lie to me. Okay? So that would be to convince. If it's accuse, then it's, I know you lied. I know you did. You've been lying all along. You've been lying every day of your life. Do not lie to me. Okay? Or if it's beg, then it's, I don't know what I'm going to do if nobody will tell me the truth. I need to be told the truth. Don't lie to me. Okay? So it comes out different. And there could be different reasons, as you were asking, talking about the reasons why a person might be begging, or a person might be accusing, or a person might be convincing. But of course, sometimes characters do the wrong thing. Sometimes they want somebody to be open and honest with them, but they do the wrong thing to get it. If they demand that they be honest, it might not work, right? So the verbs can be, you can play opposites. You can do lots of things with them, but there is always a reason for them.
You say it's a death to the actor's gift to put their concentration on the effect they're having on the audience?
Because they should have their concentration on their acting partner.
Okay. So if I'm in a scene with you, let's say, and it's opening night, and I know my parents are in the audience and high school friends, and I'm just, this is going to be great. But really, that's the kiss of death for the actor, because I should be focusing on our scene, our argument, our whatever it is that's binding us up there.
Well, that's the scene. The scene is the relationship. The scene is the relationship, or relationships if there's more than 2 people in the scene. That is the scene. It's the relationship and how it changes. The relationship starts out in one place and it ends up in another place. And the process of the relationship changing, that's the emotional event. And it can be very subtle, it can be very small. That in the beginning they're friends, they're good friends, and at the end of during the scene they exchange intimacies, and at the end they're closer friends than they were at the beginning. So that's that could be a scene, or that could be an emotional event. But it has to happen in the moment, and the safest way for something to happen in the moment is to be focused on the response of your partner. Now, that doesn't mean you have to always be in each other's eye line. That one character might be making a sandwich and the other one is over there. So you don't have to always have the eye line, but you have to always have the awareness of the other character, the other actor, even if it's a single, even if it's a close up on this actor, that the other actor, even if they're out of frame, they're still in the scene. So they're still in the shot, even though if they're not physically in the shot. And that is the simplest way, the strongest way, the most effective way, the most reliable way for an actor not to start worrying about whether their parents are going to like it or not, or whether the director is going to like it or not, or whether anything else is to lose themselves in the other actor. And connecting to the other actor is the thing that awakens an actor to their own impulses. It sounds like a counterintuitive, but it's true.
So let's say we have actor A and actor B on stage. And actor A is very much about playing off of actor B and is dialed into them and has been able to lose the audience in some sense. They don't even realize they're there. But actor B is concerned with the audience and is concerned with their performance. And there's a disconnect. A can't connect to B because B is in its own performance.
Yeah, well, the director has to speak to actor B.
What if in that moment, some people might, get it carried away and they run with it, and that actor A can't have that director intervene?
You're talking about a theater piece?
Could be a theater piece, yeah. So how would actor A...
sorry. But the director has much less control than a theater piece. So that's a completely different thing anyway, because they're, once they open, they start making they start changing things. So, I did it myself when I was in theater. You start throwing out direction left and right. But for film, and most of my people most of my readers, my book, Directing Actors 25th Anniversary Edition, are film directors or television. And and the director has a tremendous amount of control over things. So certainly over whether to do another take or not.
But we still hear about, we do still hear about an actor upstaging another actor and kind of running with it. Should actor A, who's trying to stay more true to the scene, play off that? Should they bring that to the performance?
Okay.
If B is running wild and is unharnessed and is like, wait a minute, you're changing all the rules here, should A then say, okay, I guess there's new rules here and I have to go?
Well, that's a tough one. That did happen to me when I was doing theater back in the 70s. I was doing this play. It was a pretty strange play. And it was like 5 or 6 people on stage at once and sitting together, 5 or 6 female characters on stage at once. And we were blocked so that we were sitting in a circle. And then there was one actor there who had the fewest lines. And she was playing an old lady, and so she decided to pretend that she had dentures and that her dentures were loose, and so she was doing this kind of thing through the whole play. And my character was also a little bit of a crazy person, but I kept my craziness, within the bounds of the direction I'd been given, and the making sure that the actors who were supposed to have focus had focus when they were supposed to have it. But this one lady was throwing everything off, and I toyed with the idea of picking up on her energy and being as crazy as her in order to feel like I was still in the play. But I decided not to. So, but I had some friends who came who said, you know, she's actually very funny. She's actually the best thing in the play, and so you should match her energy and go ahead. So, I don't know. But you know, it's the director was also in the play, so she was there every night, and I wanted to work with her again. So I didn't think she would like it, so I didn't do it. But does that answer your question? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm thinking actually, was it Robert Altman's Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean?
Oh, right.
So you have Karen Black, you have Cher, you have all these different people, and they're all their own star of the show, but in different ways, and they don't really seem to be outshining one another. They're contained within their parts, but when their part is up, they're brilliant, kind of thing. But not everybody works. I'm sure, who knows how it was behind the scenes, but for the audience, you see this thing where no one's trying to step over one another.
Right. Well, Altman was famous for his ensembles. You know, and he, when you're asking how does the director set the tone, and he always made sure that everything was an ensemble piece, so that and everybody was going to get their turn. Everybody was going to get their turn, and it, you know, he promoted and created an all for one and one for all atmosphere on the set by giving huge amounts of permission. One of my students was in the player, I think, and had a small part in one scene, and she told me afterwards that he said he wanted them to do it differently on every take. He said they didn't have to follow blocking, and they didn't have to say the same lines, and they could do whatever, they could follow any impulse. And I mean, it's a brilliant movie, right? So that was his way of doing it, and he knew everything about blocking. He could block really, really well. You know, the player, that opening scene, it's blocked within an inch of its life. You know, in order to have that 4-minute take, everybody has to hit their marks at exactly the right time. So he knew how to block a scene perfectly, but he could see if it was there or not. And he would let the act, I don't know, but that's him. I never tell my clients or my students that they should do that. You know, try to be Robert Altman. He was a genius, and but I think he let people know you're going to get your turn. You can trust me. Actors trusted Altman completely.
I think that you said the magic word. Yeah, get your turn.
Yeah,
and so you feel like you don't need to, you know, mess with the dentures, so to speak, even though you said that your friend said that it worked, but I could see that happening where maybe it could take some people out of the play and they felt distracted, or who knows, I wasn't there, but I like that.
But you know, if it's a movie, of course, you could just not use any close-ups of that character. It's very easily fixed in the editing room. Just don't use the shots that she's in if you think she's gone too far.
Can you explain how a director can micromanage an actor and their performance?
Yes, by talking too much. That's the quick answer to that. There are directors who, want to delve into the inner life a lot. They want to talk. They want to front load. That's the thing that I think is the most dangerous, is when, you know, the director has a very an idea that he or she is very excited about, and they want to front load the actor with it before they even do anything, and they overtalk. It's the simplest thing is overtalking. I finally boiled it down to telling directors, listen more than you talk, and be percentage about that. Hear your own voice less than 50% of the time when you're talking to actors. Listen to them more than you talk to them. And that's a big thing that actors complain about, is directors that overtalk, but they still don't understand what the director wants. That's just so easy to happen, and that's so very simply circumvented if the director understands the tool of emotional event, because that's takes much less time to talk about. And then if you can say to the actors, wait, this is not a family, nice people being nice. This is an argument, and then let the actors get there however they get there, instead of sort of well, now you have to get mad, and then you have to be disappointed, and then you have to get mad back, and now you have to, and that's micromanaging, is sort of giving the result for each emotional turning point that you want. That's another way to micromanage, rather than allowing each actor to have a through line objective, something they want or need from the other actor, and an obstacle, of course, very useful, and then let the ins and outs of how they win the argument or lose the argument, let that happen in the moment. If they both want something from each other.
What if they're not getting the result they want?
I encourage directors to want a different result than sometimes they think they do. Because sometimes they've gotten married in their minds to a certain, that they think the eyebrows are supposed to rise at a certain point, or there's supposed to be a certain line reading at a certain point, or there's supposed to be a certain pitch of anger, or at a certain point. And I try to get them, this is with script analysis, I try to get them to use their script analysis to get to a different thing to want, to get to the emotional event that they want. Because if they want those particular surface things, I can't tell them how to get it. I really can't. So I spend a lot of my time trying to get them to want something else.
So maybe the director doesn't know what they want?
That's how it feels to the actor. That if the director keeps saying, well, raise your eyebrow just a little bit more, then the director thinks they don't know what they want. They think they want that, but they don't really know what they want. And that is about what the scene is about. Is it about survival? Is the scene about survival? Only one will survive, say. Is the scene about loss of purpose? Is the scene about is the scene a confession that gets accepted or not? Those are the things, and it's not that easy for directors to get to that. They have to do some script analysis. They have to look underneath the surface of the script and underneath the surface of the instructions that the stage directions give them to find it. And it takes practice. And it's useful not just for talking to actors, but for talking to anybody, for talking to your cinematographer, or talking to production designer or producers or financial people. It's useful for anything. So it's a different way of looking at what the scene is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. What if someone's trying to talk to someone more because they feel like they're not getting the truth of what's going on, or there's a disconnect, there's something that's not being said?
Wait, can you say more about that?
Sure. So if the director is talking too much, maybe they're doing it as a way to fill in the lines of something that's not being said, or something that's not coming to the surface. So they're using it as a tool, their own tool.
Well, actors do the best they can to figure out what the director wants. So if the director is over talking, they'll listen for little clues to give them something to try on the next take.
What is the language of permission?
It's a way of engaging the actors with the process. It can be as simple as saying, I had this idea that this scene could have higher stakes. Do you want to try that? Instead of saying, get angrier. Okay, so that's the language. An example of the language of permission is offering the actors a way to giving them the opportunity to say no, and then because it's good to find out if an actor doesn't like your direction. It's good to find out, because then you can say, okay, well, I'm going to try to make a case for this. Let me tell you why I think this is worth trying. And it's very helpful. A key element of the language of permission is that if the actor has a different idea than yours, than the director's, mine, if I'm the director, that I am not, if I discuss it with the actor, I'm not trying to convince them that my idea is better than theirs, but I'm trying to convince them that my idea is worth trying.
So it's being soft with people, it's not being abrupt. It's asking, hey, Judith, could we try it maybe this way instead of me dictating to you? Like, Judith, no, I need you to do it this way. I'm showing you respect. I'm being soft.
It's partly, but I guess if I use myself as an example, when I'm directing, I have a lot of energy. So I wouldn't say that I'm soft. I'm very energetic. So it's not an energy level. It's checking in. Okay. It's checking in. I wouldn't say it's an energy level, because my energy is very high. And when I really want something, I'll say, wait, okay, maybe I haven't explained this yet, but there's something that I want that we're not getting to, and tell me what you think I'm saying. To get feedback. Tell me what you... And you see how a conversation like that has to be private.
Sure, but you're checking in instead of
You're checking in.
Giving orders. And so even if the energy is intense, there's still a mutual respect.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, they're collaborators. They're collaborators. They are artists, and they are people, and they're smart. So why wouldn't you use all of the brains on the set?
What is an emotional event?
An emotional event is something that happens. It's something that happens that changes the temperature, the emotional temperature of the scene. So it could be a turning point, or it could, but it doesn't have to be a single moment. It can be what happens in the whole scene. So the whole scene could be an argument, or, well, let me mention Mike Nichols, who I quote a lot in my book, Directing Actors 25th Anniversary Edition. I quote Mike Nichols a lot in the chapter on emotional event, because he really, really got it. And he was a teacher himself, and in addition to being a brilliant director. And he said at one time, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I make some adjustments to this dictum of Mike Nichols. I take the liberty. He said, every scene is either a fight, a negotiation, or a seduction. And that's a useful way for directors to kind of get introduced to the idea of emotional event. It's something that big, and they're that different from each other. A fight, a negotiation, seduction, they're different from each other. And that's a helpful way for people to think about it. I actually think that it can be, refined. I was using the example before, an argument between best friends who have never argued before is different from an argument between people who have had many arguments in the past, right? Those are two different kinds of arguments. But it's something that happens between the two people, the two characters in the scene, that changes their relationship. So And in this, I'm very proud of this chapter 5 in this book. Very proud of the chapter 5 because I finally really addressed this question of emotional event. In the first book, the original Directing Actors, which came out in 1996, I mentioned emotional event and I mentioned how important it was, but I didn't really describe it. And over the years that I was teaching after that, and people they were asked to read that book before they came to any of my workshops, and the directors would always say, you know, I love the book, but there's one thing I'm confused about, and it's emotional event. So I kept trying to be clearer and clearer about it. And it's a very slippery topic, you know. It's one of those things, you know, I was in class, I would finally be reduced to saying, you know, if you keep watching me watch scenes and talk about the emotional event, you'll eventually be able to do it yourself. And I thought, well, that's a cop-out. You know, I have to be able to really describe it for them more clearly. And then I did another book in 2003 called The Film Director's Intuition. And I made a stronger attempt to describe what emotional event is in that book, but I still wasn't satisfied, and people still kept asking about it. So in this book, the 25th anniversary edition of Directing Actors, I really went all out. I spent a lot of time trying to explain it from a lot of different points of view, because it's slippery, and so I came at it from different points of view. Like, you could think of it, at the end of the scene, is the relationship closer than it was at the beginning, or is it more alienated than it was at the beginning? That's a simple way to look at emotional event. And some other simple ways are one character hurts the other person's feelings. That's an emotional event. Or one character asks for forgiveness and receives it. That's another emotional event. Or one person tries to pick a fight, and the other person engages. They pick a fight with each other. So so there are different ways of looking at it, but. And it takes a lot of practice to think about that. What is the event of the scene? And that it's something underneath the plot event.
And so Mike Nichols said there's 3 sort of wants in every scene. It's one to argue.
No. That it's either one of that a scene is either a fight,
sure, or
a negotiation, or a seduction.
Right. So it's one of 3.
That's, yeah. I mean, I think he was, it's a very broad thing to say. I mean, one thing that it makes me realize is that you can play fast and loose, that a lot of, you would think any love scene is a seduction, right? That would seem automatic. But actually most love scenes are negotiations. So that's an interesting way to do it. You would think that the scenes in Fight Club, where they're having the fights, you would think that those are fights, right? But they're really seductions. So you can, I don't know, you're looking for what's underneath it.
What if a scene does not have an emotional event?
You're going to end up taking it out in the editing room. If it doesn't have an emotional event, it stops the story. So that even scenes that look like a connector scene or an exposition scene still need to have an emotional event. There's no such thing as a scene that's an exposition scene. So I was very lucky with this 25th anniversary edition of Directing Actors. I was very lucky to get permission to use a scene from The Matrix to do my script analysis example, and it's a very short scene. It's like a page and a half. And I think most people would look at it and think it's a connector scene. They're in a car. They've just arrived back to the Matrix, and it's Neo's first visit back to the Matrix. I think they're on the way to see the Oracle. And so it's a connector scene between this, very amazing trip from the Nebuchadnezzar back to the Matrix, and then this amazing scene at the Oracle's office. And but it's of course it's an excellently written script, and I just found so much in it, and so I really felt good about being able to show how something that most people might think of as a connector scene had lots and lots of event in it. Even if the most simplest exposition scene, Shakespeare is full of them. A messenger comes up and gives information to the king, and then goes off. That you could say that the emotional event is that the messenger, they achieves their message, that it raises their stature in the eyes of the king, or it cements their low stature when they're dismissed. You can find emotional event in any so-called exposition scene, and you must.
What are the questions that a director should ask to uncover the emotional event?
Great question. Okay, I go into that a lot. And one way that, and any question that occurs to you, like, why are they here? Why is this? You can always start with, why is this scene in the script? Why do the characters do what they do? Why do they say what they do? I like to always start with mysterious lines. Mysterious lines, very helpful place to start when I'm doing script analysis. So, well, first, I look at just my first impressions, where I honor my first impressions, where I say, and even if it's, this is a scene that looks like a torture scene. One person is beating down the other person. So that would be something I don't like. I don't care for torture scenes. So I would say, well, I got to find something else then, and say, so I honor that. I have that first impression, or I have the first impression that it's a love scene, that these people are falling in love. It's one of those little steps along the way to falling in love. So I honor my first impressions, but then I start looking for mysterious lines. And I make myself find at least 3 in every scene. And first I look at mysterious lines, the ones that bother me, the ones that it's my tendency that my first impression, my first tendency is to say, I don't like this line. It shouldn't be here. It should be rewritten. I don't like it. And then make myself come up with 3 different ways of understanding it. Make myself. And by the time I've done that, I'm fine with the line. I no longer want it to be taken out, which is a very, very good thing to use for if you're directing television. If you're directing television, you don't get to change lines or take them out if you don't like them, not without permission, certainly, and you're very unlikely to get it. So it's very, very useful to be able to find a way to justify any line that at first you don't like. Of course, I have a theater background, so that's how I learned that, because if you're doing a Tennessee Williams play, you didn't say, well, I don't like this line. Can we change it? No, you don't get to change it. So you have to find a way to justify it. It's finding a way to justify the line. So I start with the lines I don't like, and then I start with the lines that I love. Sometimes there are lines that I love, and then I make myself still look for subtext to them. Instead of saying, this line is so good, I just have to say it, and it's, going to be wonderful, I still make myself look for, what are 3 different realities that could be behind it. Now, I should probably give you an example, huh?
Yeah, I would just real quick, what would make you not like a line?
Well, I was thinking about this morning. And I was thinking about, because, I decided to think of something from Shakespeare because, we don't have to worry about copyright if I use some lines from Shakespeare, right? So I was thinking about the to be or not to be speech, which goes to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Well, this is a line that I both love and hate. The line about take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. I mean, I love this line. It seems to so perfectly say something about the state of mind of suicide ideation. That the only there's nothing. I have nothing I can do. I can't. I'm powerless to change anything, and even my efforts to change. I'm powerless. But if I look at it in a very word by word kind of way, take arms against a sea of troubles. That's a mixed metaphor, right? Why did he do that? This is Shakespeare. He doesn't have to mix his metaphors. He can do anything. So why did he do that? You don't like the idea of shooting bow and arrow into the waves. That's the image that comes up when I think about it. The sea of troubles. It's like the waves crashing over the shore. You take a bow and arrow and well, actually, as soon as I say that, I say, yes, everything that we do in life is as futile as shooting bows and arrows into the waves. So, well, automatically, I like the line better. But then I say to myself, well, make myself come up with two more. And another one that of course comes to me is that, the mixing of the metaphors is a product of his disordered mind. That sometimes I think about Hamlet a lot actually, and sometimes, especially in the last week, because I went to see that movie, The Northman, which is based on the same legend, the same story as the Shakespeare used to base the story of Hamlet. And anyway, sometimes I think that Shakespeare's Hamlet, was had early onset schizophrenia, brought on by trauma, and that his mind really is, and that this speech, which it's so beautiful that you think it all makes sense, but it really doesn't, and it's not meant, that it doesn't make sense because his mind is going from image to image. Anyway, that's I just did two. I'm going to stop because sometimes I talk too long about Hamlet. So I'll just stop there. Come up with at least two, three if you can, different ways to understand a line that bothers you.
What is subtext?
The subtext is the thing that is not being said. So if I say, I'm very happy to meet you, what am I not saying? What's the thing I'm not saying is, I've been waiting for this appointment for 6 months and I can't understand why it took so long. And then, I'm very happy to meet you. Or is it that, or is it something else? It's the thing that's not being said. And so that can come in a lot of forms. It can be the history. Again, somebody asks, how are you? And I say, I'm fine. And I don't give you my whole medical history, right? It's a long one. And so I don't give that to you, but that's always behind. Every time I say I'm fine, I'm a little bit grateful that I'm still alive, right? So that's a subtext for me every time I say I'm fine. But if you say, here's a great way to explain subtext. Let's say that you have renovated your house, renovated your living room, and put a lot of time and energy and money into it. And then a friend comes to the door for the first time, and they come in and they say, "Oh, you changed everything around." Right? What's the subtext, right? It's like they don't like it. That's the subtext, right? But if they come in and they say, "You changed everything around," then you know that they did like it. So subtext happens in our daily lives all the time. It's, it affects the way that the line comes out. It's the emotional. Sanford Meisner used to talk about the emotions of the scene are a river. The words are boats that float on that river. So the subtext is the emotional river of the scene or of the character. And so sometimes it's a line reading. Those were two different line readings for two different subtexts having to do with this one topic. It can be, a different history. It can be a different verb. That's what I did with the verbs, with "don't lie to me."
Could I read a few lines? These are mine that I came up with.
Oh, great.
Okay. And so maybe you can critique me on my delivery of them and also the subtext. And it could be okay. So the first one is I love that dress on you, Judith. Did Paul tell you? He did tell you, right, that we used to date? Here's another one. Dad knows. He wants the money put back in his account immediately. Okay, last one. Your check is waiting for you in payroll. Security will walk you down and you have 5 minutes to clean out your desk.
That was awesome.
You're
hired.
Okay, great.
I'm going to cast you. You're fantastic.
Okay, thanks. But so different meanings for each one. So maybe we could start with I love that dress on you. By the way, did Paul tell you? Meaning it's someone trying to sort of undercut someone, compliment. I don't know. That's how I read into it.
Sure. Yeah, I think you absolutely got the idea of subtext. The "I love that dress on you" that is not to be taken literally.
Sure, and building up. Yeah.
It has a reason behind it. That's not the literal meaning of the words. So subtext means that the things people say, they're not. There's something else behind it. There's you could call it an agenda or there's something else. Now, in that case, in the case of the first one, that person is conscious of her agenda. I would say that and her intention, I would say, is to undermine the person she's talking to.
Sure.
With the information that, did you know I used to date Paul? That you want to undermine the person you're talking to, and by beginning with the compliment on the dress, it's a way to make the knife in the knife in the back even sharper. It's an opposite.
Okay.
Sure,
it throws the person off their game a little.
Yeah. So you're saying, I love that dress, but with the intention to undermine.
Right.
Is lovely. What about the other? Did you want to talk more about the other two?
Oh, okay. So Dad knows he wants the money put back in his account immediately. So sibling to sibling, something's happened, it involves money.
Yeah. I guess. Well, what did you feel your intention was?
I guess you're right. When I look at it, there's less subtext. It seems like it's pretty obvious, but
not obvious at all.
Oh,
you could do it. I could do it completely opposite.
Okay, yeah.
I'll just try it.
Sure.
Dad knows, and he wants the money put back in the account right away.
That's true. That's a softer. That's a compassionate.
Well, it's more caressing. Maybe it depends on the history between these two. Maybe this person has been having a rough time. maybe the person that your character is talking to has been having a rough time, and but maybe they both colluded on this rearranging of funds, and maybe it's I'm the one that has to put the money back. I think the way you wrote it exactly doesn't make it have to be the person you're talking to. So it's dad knows, and he wants the money put back. Yeah, maybe it's like very practical. My dad knows he wants the money put back immediately.
Cover blown, right? That's true. It could be played different ways.
So the questions you have, or if you're looking at those lines on a page, are what is the history? Did the two of these two siblings, did they collude on these on whatever happened to these funds, or is it the fault of that one, or even just the fault of this one? So those are the kind of questions that I always start out with lines like that are on a page. I ask, what's the history of this caper, whatever was done with the money.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And then lastly was just, and maybe more self-explanatory, just, your check is waiting for you in payroll. Security will walk you down after you've cleaned out your desk, and you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's an example of something that could be thought of as exposition, but the way that you gave it an intention to punish,
right,
which is very reasonable. That this is the person who's up to here with that person who's being relieved of their duties, and the subtext that I heard when you read that was that this person is off my back, out of my, this person, this nightmare is gone. But again, if you saw it on the page, there's other possibilities that it could be. It could be that the person speaking fought to keep this this person at their job, and they could even be crying.
Or they were the reason the person's fired. So yeah, there could be different. It could be
Yeah. I thought your choices were just marvelous, but that's a very helpful example about if we saw each of those lines on a page, we could really ask all these questions to get at what their subtext is.
And would it depend on the tone in which they're said?
Well, tone is another word for verb, I think. Like a teasing tone is the verb to tease. So, tone is another way of talking about it.
Great.
I like the verbs because they're so muscular.
If a scene does not have subtext, what can a director do to add it in?
You have to believe that it does have subtext and look for it. I just feel that so strongly, that there's no, sometimes when I was teaching workshops on with actors and directors working together and bringing in scenes that they'd worked on, and sometimes people will say, well, this is a very straightforward scene. And I would just say, I want you to take that out of your vocabulary. This is a straightforward scene. There's no such thing. And if it really is, then probably should be rewritten so that there's something extra in it, so that there's some twist, something that lets us into the personalities and predicaments of these characters, or foreshadows something in the story that, a straightforward scene probably doesn't belong in the movie. So, and sometimes they need to be rewritten, but sometimes the filmmaker hasn't looked hard enough for something else that could be there. That's what I think.
So is straightforward almost code for there's no life to it? It's too dry?
Well, it's code for exposition.
Oh, okay.
Or a connector scene. This is a connector scene. This Yeah.
Right, okay. So when you talked about Neo in the one scene in your book, you said it was sort of a connector scene, but it seemed like that wasn't that straightforward. I mean, there was, he's having a memory of a restaurant, I believe.
Oh,
and he
yeah. Well,
passes
it's
by.
partly, how great the writing is, but because so much is evoked and there's so much imagery in it. There's so much imagery, the image of the noodle place, the image of the noodle place. It's so important. It gives us because we see very little of Neo when he's Thomas Anderson. At the beginning of the movie, and this gives us a whole picture of Thomas Anderson sitting alone in the noodle place on his lunch hour, or with somebody, and it evokes it takes us somewhere. I mean, he goes somewhere, we go with him.
What's the purpose of script analysis?
The purpose of script analysis is to figure out what there is to be shot, and that's the core of the scene, the some people call it the nugget of the scene, the what it's about. I like to use this term emotional event, and I tried to find something catchier, but it just expresses what I want to say, so I stick to it. But it's to find out what there is to be shot. I was talking to a former student of mine just a few days ago who's been directing television. Well, first she did a beautiful independent feature film that just wonderful a couple of years ago, and then from that she started getting some work doing television, and so we were having lunch with her and another former student, and she was saying that she still felt really puzzled about how to figure out how to do television because, it's because there's no time. She had spent a whole year preparing for her feature film, her independent feature film, and she was just puzzled, like because she said, I don't know how to be sure that I get what I have to get. And I said, well, I think you're looking at it from the wrong point of view. You have to do the work to figure out what it is you want to get. You have to start not just with, don't start with what camera angles you want. Start with what the scene is about, and start there. And then, I talk in this new book, my dollhouse approach to figuring out your blocking, to get some dollhouse dolls or action figures or Lego figures, and put some furniture around on a tabletop and move them around and see where they want to move while you're saying the lines, or where they want to stay in one place, and then figure out your shot list from taking from looking at that through a viewfinder, and but that those places but to have an idea before you start moving them around of what the scene is about, what happens to these relationships, how do people hurt each other, how do they rescue each other, how do they take one more step in a love story or one more step in a breakup, and that's where you always have to start, and it will get easier to figure out your shot list if you start there. If you start with, I have to come up with a shot list, well, should I do this shot? You won't have a reason for choosing any particular shot. So you need to know what the scene is about in order to have a reason for choosing the shots.
So even setting up a mock set with a Lego figures or whatever, even if it's two stationary figures having a discussion, whether it's positive or negative,
see, this is me. And that's why this is a suggestion. I'm not saying everybody should do this or has to do this. But for me, it does help if I take my two Lego figures and I just sit them down here and I say the lines out loud while they're right here. And I feel it in my fingers no, this person doesn't want to move over here. This person doesn't want to move over here. They're I don't know. You have to try it to see if it works for you. I mean, I'm not saying it would work for everybody, but it's, you know how some people say that they prefer, when they're writing, they prefer to write longhand because it's more physical and their fingers are more connected to their brain that way. It's actually the opposite for me. I find my fingers more connected to my brain if I'm using a keyboard. But anyway, whatever connects your body to itself, to your body to your brain, is always going to be a good thing. So I think that helps.
Clues in a screenplay, sort of underlying world of behavior. Can you talk about
the clues? Well, that's the script analysis. You're looking for clues. If a character says, "I remember you were the worst drunk in the dorm." Well, that's a clue. They went to college together, right? That's a very simple clue. And you're looking for clues like that so that everything doesn't have to be spelled out.
What are the best ways for directors and actors to unpack a screenplay?
They do that work separately. Usually. They would do that work separately. Now, there are exceptions, of course. I have seen heard about and seen tape of a rehearsal for The Social Network, directed by David Fincher, where they all sat in a room, all the actors, and the director and the writer, I think, was also in the room, Aaron Sorkin, and they went through the whole script line by line and talked about what each line meant. So that can be done, and that would be unusual, but the movie came out very good. So that's very interesting to note. And I think directors and actors can do this. This can even be done on Zoom, one at a time. That a director and a lead actor can go over all the lines of their scenes, all of their scenes, and allow themselves. The idea of talking about what each line means is that you're allowing questions. You're even starting with the question, what does this line mean? With the understanding that it might not mean what it literally says it means. And just asking that question, what does this line mean, is you're on the way to acknowledging that it has subtext.
And I'm wondering, who determines what the line means? Is that the writer-director? Because the actor could embody this character, and it turns out they actually may know some of the motivation in some ways better.
You're so right. So that's why it's good to ask questions. One thing that I say to directors is, you will be, they're afraid of being judged by actors sometimes. And I say, you will be judged by the quality of your questions more than by the exactitude of your answers. So a good question is better than a bullshit answer. But you got to have good questions. So that's the reason for doing script analysis, is so you'll have good questions. And then, but if you're using questions with actors, which I recommend that you direct by asking questions, you have to be prepared for the actor to answer with something that you're not expecting.
So this is similar to a table read.
I like to call it a company read rather than a table read, because I like to do them without tables. But table read is the usual description. Well, this table read that they did with the whole company or maybe just the main characters for The Social Network, that was around a table, and but what I liked about it was just this idea that for every line you could say, let's talk about it, and it assumes there could be something more to it than just the literal words. So say the literal words are, I'm tired of talking about this. Okay? So that could be the literal line. I'm tired of talking about this. then if you say, well, what does this line mean? Then you're opening the idea that it could mean, I actually think you're tired of talking about this, and I'm going to let you off the hook. I mean, the obvious thing is, I'm tired of talking about this. Just shut up, right? That's the obvious meaning. But it might mean something else, even opposite. Like I see your eyes wandering, and maybe we should go on to something else. So, or it could be, I'm afraid this is going to get into dangerous waters, and there are things about me that I don't want you to know. So let's stop talking. So it could mean it's opening the door to choices, And as far as making the choices, here's something so important, is that there are certain choices that the actor and director must agree on, in order to be on the same page about the story they're telling. But there are so many choices that they don't have to be on the same page about, that where the choices can be left up to the actor, that the actor can have secrets. The actors can have secrets. They can have secrets from their other actors, and they can have secrets even from the director. Yeah, this is really important. And now the director is responsible for saying the scene works, let's move on to the next one, or saying, no, I'm still not satisfied, I want to work on it some more. But they don't have to say, make this choice. Because and the thing is that they don't know, when you have an idea, it's an idea. If a director has an idea for a choice, that they think that the objective to humiliate the other person is going to work for the scene, that's an idea. It's not the scene until the actor tries it and it works. So, yeah.
And when a director gives an actor a secret that none of the other cast will know, when is that happening? Is it a little note? Are they pulling him aside, having a little chat? Seems
anytime. It can happen anytime. Yeah. The director can suggest a secret. But again, I would always do that with the language of permission, to say, I was wondering if maybe they did talk about this one time before, and it's just that your character you're talking to doesn't remember. That could be a secret. It could be a very simple one, or it could be very big secret. But it could happen anytime. And that's a big part of a director's talent, is being able to have their intuition, their leadership skills, is being able to have a sense of when to step in, when to step back. Knowing when to step in, when to step back. Now that's something that I can't tell people. They have to get it by experience. They have to practice and do and try things over and over, and then develop an intuition about when to step in, when to step back, when to leave an actor alone and let them figure it out themselves. When to step in and say, are you struggling? Can I help? I had an idea, it might be worth trying.
Why are verbs so important to directing and acting?
Because they express behavior, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the behavior of the characters to tell the story, the behavior of the characters in interaction with each other, their relationships, and their behavior in reaction to good news or bad news, and the events of the plot. So verbs are very important because they put the actor's focus on the other actor. So if I'm deciding that my character should be angry, or have been told that my character is angry, then my focus is on myself. Am I angry enough? Whereas if I'm using the verb to punish, then I'm punishing the other person, my focus is on you. Are you punished yet? I don't know. I don't think you're punished enough. So I'm going to keep doing it. Okay? and that keeps me going, and it keeps the anger crescendoing, actually, and not just crescendoing, but having hills and valleys, and expressive nuance. Okay, so because I'm focused on you, on your reaction, rather than on me. Am I angry enough? That's the center of why verbs are so helpful. And so what I call the verb family, I put a bunch of things in there. The active verbs, which you could make a list of: demand, beg, punish, seduce, flirt, encourage, right? And which are also called intentions. A lot of these things the terms are used differently by different people. And then there's the objective, which is what the character wants in the scene. And so strictly speaking, the objective is what the character wants. The verb is or intention is what they're doing to get it. So if I want you to calm down, okay, then I might hint that I want you to calm down. Maybe you could lower your voice a little bit. I'm not saying this to you, obviously. You have such a lovely, sweet voice. But what if I use the wrong verb? What if I demand that you calm down? Calm down. Well, it's a very unfortunate verb to use if you want somebody to calm down, because it's like with dogs, right? If dogs are barking and you tell them to stop barking, you're just doing what they want you to do. They just think, oh, they like me barking, they're barking back. So anyway, people are like that too, so demanding that somebody calm down is foolish. It doesn't work, and yet people do it all the time. You see it all the time, certainly with their dogs, but also with each other, demanding that somebody calm down. So people make mistakes. People act irrationally. So verbs are very helpful for finding irrational behavior. Like, it would be irrational to demand that somebody calm down, but characters and people do it all the time. So it's an opposite, right? It's opposite to the thing that will work. So verbs are great for but also the objective or the need, and also the spine. There's a spine. A character may have a spine for the whole script. And it may not be the same as the script, as the plot spine.
Can you explain what that is? The spine? The spine,
it's who the person is in a kind of very basic level. I like to say that I think that a person's spine, a character's spine, is in place by the time they're 8 years old. So by the time, I had a disabled mother, which happened when I was 4. So a spine of putting the needs of other people ahead of my own just happened. I didn't choose it, but it happened, right? So those things, and they follow you throughout your life, and you can still be a very assertive person, which I am in some ways, but it's something that it's in your emotional DNA. It's a part of you, if that makes sense. And finding those things, it's helpful for finding who the character is, who are they really. So verbs, of course, work great for comedy, because opposites work great for comedy. So if somebody is complaining about how somebody that their coworkers threw them a birthday party, they threw me a birthday party, that could be funny, right? Because it's inappropriate. It's incongruous, an inappropriate verb for the subject matter that they're talking about.
If we can just go back to spine for one moment.
Sure.
I'm sorry to jump around, but
no, that's fine.
I really like that. So if we take Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
There's actually several great spines, because there's Forrest, there's Jenny, there's Captain Dan, or Lieutenant Dan, sorry. There's Bubba. There's so many spines, but if we just took the two main ones, so we see that Forrest, he sort of has his own spine of seeming like the one that was sort of weak, but he was actually stronger than everybody else in many, many ways, and always kind of coming out ahead. And then we have the spine of Jenny, who unfortunately seemed to repeat itself a lot in her life. And the mother, played by Sally Field, she had a spine of always kind of making sure that Forrest was treated fairly and that he had it good. So I think I'm understanding this spine, because at first I didn't know.
Well, I think I would say that Forrest Gump's spine is to take care of people. That's what strikes me. He takes care of other people. That's what he always does. Another way to think of it is it's his habitual behavior is to take care of people. I don't know. That's what just struck me. And Jenny, of course, has a strong self-destructive streak. And, and sometimes people have a spine of punishing themselves for whatever reason. There's always a reason. Although, of course, it could be genetic. Sometimes people are born with certain proclivities, and that becomes the way that their lives go.
Now I'm going to start looking for the spine. I like that. It's a great analogy, too, because I think of the spine of a book almost, and just guiding the pages.
The important thing to remember is it's not something that the person chooses. But it describes them. And it can be helpful, even if the character, and people don't know what their spine is. I mean, when I said that about me, I don't know if that's true. I think it is. But most of the time, people don't know their own spine. They don't think about it. And characters don't know their own spine, but it still can be helpful if the actor does. And it still can be a tool that a director, and I think if a director was talking about spine with an actor, to have it be kind of casual, rather than saying, okay, let's sit down and decide what your spine is. I don't think that's, because it starts to feel like you're filling in blanks. But if it comes up about the scene, well, if you're saying, well, there's almost this sense that Forrest's spine is to take care of other people. It's an opposite, because he actually needed to be taken care of himself. And of course that brings up the mother. It's maybe she did such a good job of taking care of him that he has this model of taking care, and he has surplus resources to take care of others. And I don't know, you start to feel like, okay, now that's a family, and I can understand it a little bit.
So just like in life, how other people show us our spine, in a movie, other characters will show the protagonist.
Yes, the relationships are where they come out.
Judith, is it true that relationships tell the story, not plot?
I know I've said that, and I know I meant it, but don't get me wrong, I love a good plot. I love, love, love a good plot with lots of surprises and a real, tightly created plot. But once you have a great script, a well-written script, and a well-written script has to have a tight plot and a wonderful plot. And it also has to have theme. It has to have an idea of what it's about and what its purpose is in the world. So it has to have a good plot and a good a theme that matters. But the thing that brings those to life, brings the theme, the idea / theme to life, and the plot to life, are the relationships, the scene, because it's scene by scene that things happen to the characters. Well, let's say The Godfather. Godfather has a great plot, right? Terrific plot. And And it's also got a very big theme, family. It's about family. And it's also got lots of sub-themes. It's, got lots of thematic material there about, the great immigration from Europe to the United States in the 20th century. There's lots of capitalism, the perversion of capitalism, and by the mafia and in capitalism in itself even. So it's got a lot of themes, and Coppola always said that the central theme was family. So it's got a great theme. Everybody cares about family, and it's got a great plot full of surprises, but always inevitable. Every plot thing comes out of the thing that's happened before. But what activates the great plot and the great ideas of the movie are the relationships of Michael's relationship with his father, of Sonny's relationship with his father, Fredo's relationship with his father, and then Sonny's relationship with Michael, and everybody's relationship to Connie, the baby of the family. And so that's what makes the ideas and the plot come to life, is the relationships. That's all I meant by that.
So if we looked at The Godfather, how much did those relationships with, let's say, the father and son relationships really matter to the story? Or were they everything in the story?
They're everything. They're everything as far as making the story work. I don't know if you're watching, there's this thing on television, this miniseries called The Offer, and it's about the making of The Godfather. And of course, I'm watching it, and they recreated, just in the last episode, they recreated something that Coppola decided to do like a couple days before they started shooting. He invited all of the cast, all of the principal cast, to all of the cast that's a Corleone family member, invited them to a restaurant, and they all had dinner together. And he said, he didn't tell them to do anything in particular, but I'd always heard this story, and then we saw it in this episode, where they started interacting with each other in character and improvising a Corleone family dinner. And so maybe you're talking about improvisation, because I'm a great believer in improvisation. I love improvisation. So I think that allowing space and rehearsal for the actors to improvise with each other, improvise the relationships. If you use rehearsal for just saying the lines of the scenes over and over and over, rehearsal is going to make things worse instead of better. So improvisation has to be a part of rehearsal, I think, in order for it to be at all useful, where you're improvising the subtext, you're improvising the relationships, rather than just saying the lines over and over. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm correctly interpreting your question, but that's what, that's how improvisation is a useful rehearsal tool. And this Coppola story is a really good example of it.